Hello, I'm Teresa Matsui, president of Matsui Nursery in California. I'm honored to share with you my thoughts about the state of the orchid industry in the United States in 2021. As we all know, the year 2020 was dominated by COVID-19. The pandemic devastated many aspects of our daily lives, including how people work, how we spend our time, and how we interact with one another. For potted orchids, the main sales channel in the United States is supermarkets that sell groceries and household supplies and that also include floral departments. This was fortunate because supermarkets remained open for commerce as essential businesses providing food and basic household necessities. At the same time, we suffered from the virtual elimination of demand generators such as weddings, parties, and other special events. We also lost business from customers who provide orchids to commercial spaces such as hotels, office buildings, and restaurants. A few orchid growers tried to replace some lost sales by selling directly to consumers via e-commerce. We have yet to see if this will grow into a sustainable market segment of adequate scale. So, what can we expect for 2021? I believe sales to supermarkets will remain strong. Consumers know that supermarkets are a source of a wide variety of high-quality floral products. As more and more people in the U.S. get vaccinated, we're hopeful that other business sectors will begin to reopen and accordingly drive higher demand for potted orchids. For example, many Americans are eager to travel again and expect to do so in the latter half of 2021. As hotels and restaurants reopen, there should be more demand for orchids as decorations in these commercial spaces. At the same time, hotels and restaurants have been hit hard by pandemic shutdowns. Many of them are even in danger of business failure. Until they recover their financial footing, they may forgo extras such as fresh orchids. As in-person gatherings are again permitted, special events and celebrations such as weddings, conferences, and banquets should drive demand for potted orchids. On the consumer side, there was a spike in demand last year for natural decor items such as flowers and potted plants. As people worked from home, they became more aware of their surroundings and wanted to beautify their homes with plants such as potted orchids. We expect this trend to continue to a certain degree. However, as people begin to engage in once prohibited activities such as traveling, exercising in gyms, or attending special events, they may not be as eager to purchase plants that require continual care, such as potted orchids. So from the demand side, orchid growers in the U.S. are likely to see a slight increase. But recovery to pre-pandemic levels is not likely to occur until 2022. Now, what about the challenges our industry is facing? I believe our challenges fall into two camps. One, logistics and supply chain issues, and two, a profitability squeeze. To begin with, our suppliers who grow small plants for us in Taiwan, mainland China, and elsewhere experienced the same kind of shocks in 2020 due to the pandemic. They saw the sharp drop in floral demand and decided to discard flask plants rather than take the risk of growing them into an uncertain market. This has depressed the supply of plants available to U.S. growers. So even if we are highly confident in the recovery and want to resume high levels of orchid production, we don't have the plant material to do so. U.S. growers are also facing increased transportation costs to bring plant materials into this country. Ocean freight rates are considerably higher than a year ago. Space on shipping vessels is scarce, and U.S. ports, particularly on the West Coast, are experiencing severe delays. For those who use air freight, such as for flask plants, The decreased availability of air cargo space and higher costs have also disrupted standard operating procedures. These shipping constraints also affect accessories for potted orchids, including stakes, clips, and decorative pottery. Growers of young orchid plants don't need such accessories. However, in the United States, these accessories are absolutely required to sell finished orchid plants into the major channels such as supermarkets and garden centers. U.S. growers are also facing rising costs that will put pressure on our profitability. We've already discussed the supply chain issues that are causing difficulty, but there are many other profit pressures. Higher labor costs are a major factor in the profit squeeze. For example, the minimum wage in the major orchid-producing states of California and Florida increased in 2021. We're also spending more on indirect labor costs due to the coronavirus. We're paying sick leave for employees needing to quarantine due to COVID exposure. We're purchasing face masks, hand sanitizers, and other personal protective supplies. We're experiencing reduced productivity due to measures required to distance employees from one another, such as greater spacing between individual employees and having to stagger rest periods to minimize the number of workers gathering in break rooms. Another factor driving our costs is the declining value of the US dollar, because many of our inputs are sourced overseas. So what does all of this mean for the orchid industry in the United States? Certainly, with rising costs, the natural inclination is to consider raising prices. With all of these cost pressures, it would not surprise me to see U.S. orchid growers attempting to raise prices in 2021 and 2022. However, a few of the largest U.S. orchid growers recently expanded their growing capacities. If their output exceeds customer demand, it will be difficult for growers to impose higher prices. Instead, we may well see prices decline for commodity orchids that everyone grows. On the other hand, orchid growers who produce unique or specialty items should be more successful in making price increases stick. Customers will have few, if any, alternate sources for those products, so those producers should have better pricing power. Whenever there are products that can be priced higher than others, it invites competition. However, as we know, growing new types of orchids is slow and costly. The length of time from when we bring in a new plant until we generate actual sales revenue is long and full of risks. In the current environment, it's unlikely that many orchid growers in the U.S. will be willing to assume significant risk. Instead, it's more likely that U.S. growers will be looking to reduce their risks in producing and selling orchids. Each U.S. grower has its unique production style. For example, Matsui Nursery grows some Phalaenopsis from flask. We purchase a small number of ready-to-cool plants as well. But the majority of our Phalaenopsis are imported from Taiwan as immature plants, which we immediately repot and continue to cultivate for up to 12 months before they're sold. Some U.S. growers utilize a mix of styles as we do, while other growers will use only ready-to-cool plants in order to minimize the time needed to convert plants to cash. The main way for U.S. growers to reduce risk is to shorten the time their plants spend in their nurseries. Therefore, if you are supplying plants to U.S. growers, you might consider if you should offer more mature plants. Of course, this would increase the time you need to wait for your plants to turn into cash, so you need to consider the risks to your own operations and what increase in price you will need to compensate yourself for this additional risk. What about expansion of the orchid industry in the United States? My personal view is that I don't see major expansions taking place in nursery facilities for the next few years. It's true that in the United States, interest rates are extremely low and banks have significant liquidity. So lenders do have the capacity to make loans to successful growers. However, no matter how low the cost of borrowing, you still need to repay the loan. So it would require a very confident grower who can demonstrate strong returns on their investment to secure conventional financing to fund an expansion or major upgrades. So, given all of this context, what are some likely scenarios for the U.S. orchid industry? There are certainly skilled orchid growers in the United States, but to be successful, growers need to sell their plants. In the U.S., in order to sell a finished orchid plant to a supermarket, you need a decorative pot. A significant amount of cash as well as warehouse space are necessary to maintain an adequate inventory of decorative pots. Accordingly, this pottery becomes yet another component subject to risks such as breakage and theft. In order to conserve cash and reduce risks, I foresee smaller orchid growers in the U.S. shift to becoming contract growers for larger entities. This would allow the smaller nurseries to continue in their core activity of producing finished orchids. The costs and requirements of maintaining a professional sales team, developing seasonal products, and warehousing pottery and other finishing accessories would be borne instead by the larger growers. This shift could satisfy larger nurseries' desires to grow their revenues without having to make the capital investments necessary to expand their growing operations. So with all of these developments and trends in mind, if you are a grower of orchid plants selling to U.S. growers, what are your prospects in 2021 and beyond? There's likely to be only a modest increase in the total number of potted orchid plants sold in the United States in the next few years, compared to the number of orchid plants sold in 2020. Therefore, if you want your sales volume to increase significantly in the next 2 or 3 years, you'll need to take business away from your competitors. For you, the question will be, how will you convince U.S. growers to abandon their current suppliers in favor of buying from you? Can you demonstrate that your plants provide superior value to that of your competitors? If not, are you simply going to reduce your prices? And is that a smart strategy for growth? And whatever you do, how will your competitors respond? Another consideration that you are apt to see, higher demand for plants of greater maturity. In general, U.S. growers want to reduce risk, and time equals risk. So U.S. growers will look to foreign suppliers to grow out their plants as long as possible. Are you willing to do this? Do you have the space to accommodate these plants in larger pots? And do you have the ability to wait longer to be paid? Your answers may well influence the direction the U.S. orchid industry takes in the years ahead. In conclusion, the U.S. orchid industry is slowly recovering after suffering the effects of a devastating worldwide pandemic. There are many challenges that we will mutually face as orchid growers. However, we're orchid growers because at heart, we are optimists and we are willing to take the long view. Although there may be slight shifts in the processes of production and changes in the faces and nature of its participants, the U.S. orchid industry will see steady improvement and recovery in the years ahead. We look forward to partnering with orchid breeders, suppliers, and enthusiasts around the world, and to seeing each other in person in future years. Thank you.